learning to accept that in some situations, one word can't undo that kind of damage. In 6th grade, I was bullied by a girl I'll call Minnie. That's obviously not her real name, by the way. Minnie was taller than me, stronger than me, had more friends than me, and did sports. She wasn't some preppy popular kid, but she was chill with just about everyone, even some teachers. I, on the other hand, was a quiet, nervous, nerdy, shy kid who had a crush on Kovu from The Lion King 2. And that's still me today, baby. My middle school was grades 6 through 8. The incoming student body was a mix of like 2 or 3 different elementary schools, and thus I was completely separated from my longtime friends of 5th grade. So now, I guess I had to make brand new friends? And I guess me being alone made me a target for bullying. But that's not my fault. Gosh. And that's why I found it so weird when Minnie started picking on me at the very start of 6th grade. Like, dude, we just spawned. Why are you getting so aggressive? I don't even know you. I also remember her 2 little followers, Willow and Frankie, also not their real names, and them finding me in the hallways between classes to discover new ways to call me fat, and ugly, and stupid, and brainstorm aloud new animals to relate my body to. Penguin was their favorite, and they'd walk behind me in the hallway like penguins to mock me. I found it really weird how no one said anything to stop it. It just made her behavior seem acceptable, and thus it made it okay for others to treat me like this too. I tried to talk to people and make new friends, but they'd just straight up pretend I was invisible. When I'd raise my hand in class, some kids would mock me, and others would laugh. It seemed like I couldn't do anything without being picked on for it. This made me hate school so much, and I was scared and sad to have to go in every day. And the only way out of this was to wait for it to be over. I had to wait a whole year for 7th grade to roll around so I could pick different classes away from Minnie. Like, I took typing class to avoid Minnie. I'm a zillennial. I can type. It was a waste of time. But, okay, I did get to play Papa's Pizzeria for like an hour every day because I always finish my work early, so maybe it worked out. The point still stands. No one wanted to sit with me, no one wanted to be on my team, and no one wanted to be my friend for fear that whatever was wrong with me that Minnie didn't like would rub off on them too. Like lice. But I don't have lice. I'm sure everyone else did though, because they all had slumber parties, and I didn't. I wrote fan fiction by myself in my room alone every night to cope. Thank you very much. I was so confused and shocked by it all, but I thought, surely this won't last. Surely an adult will step in at some point. And one day, my teacher did. So, okay, I have acid reflux. The acid in my stomach likes to do the vertical boogie up my esophagus, and thus my tummy makes weird noises sometimes. And one time during a test, it was making weird noises. The class quietly laughed at me, which was normal and happened a lot, but then I heard my teacher say, "Alyssa, stop making stupid noises." And then my classmates laughed at me, not so quietly, and that sucked. So, Miss Middle School Teacher, I am very disappointed in your behavior, and me and my Kovu plushies, we dislike you for that. Anyway, back to Minnie. This situation proved to her that not only did the teachers not care, but they were also on her side, and I knew this too. So I tried everything to avoid Minnie and her friends. New routes to class, even if it was longer. New clothes similar to what kids like her were wearing, even if I didn't like them. New and different things to eat at lunch and hope she wouldn't mock me for simply eating again. But none of that worked. And you want to know something crazy? These girls couldn't have been that much bigger than me. We were all like the same size. If they were chill, we could have been friends. You could be borrowing my coveted Lion King shirt, but you're not. And whose fault is that? Not mine, Minnie. Oh, speaking of friends, I did manage to make one friend in 6th grade, but I say friend with heavy air quotes because
Gosh, she had confidence in you and supported you, and you finally stood up to the bullies?
God, I wish. I dreamt for a day that would play out like a bad Tumblr post, where all things would magically work in my favor because I had funny, clever comebacks, and then everyone clapped. But no, here's what happened back in the real world. I'll call this friend Crystal. But Crystal wasn't really my friend. She was friends with Willow, Frankie, and Minnie. So when I'd vent to Crystal about all the awful things they were doing and saying to me, she would say,
No, but they're nice to me, so...
"Oh my god."
What? I just want to be friends with everyone. Don't make me pick sides.
Dude, dude, you can't be friends with everyone. I'm proof of that.
Well, Minnie was right. You're a...
So when my frenemy Crystal wasn't there for me, I went to my parents about Minnie and asked them what to do. My parents told me this: just ignore it. And I know that's often the go-to answer for these kinds of situations, but I'm starting to wonder if that advice is given by people who maybe haven't been bullied before, because I was already just ignoring it. I would walk into school, get mocked and bullied for being fat and ugly, and I said nothing and I did nothing. I'd ignore them because they just wanted a reaction and I refused to give it to them. I'd be in class, and when I'd answer a question, I was mocked and bullied for being dumb and stupid. And I said nothing and I did nothing because they just wanted a reaction and I refused to give it to them. I ignored it. They found out I was on my period and they dumped out my personal belongings onto the floor for the whole class to see. So I told my teacher, who saw the whole thing, and she told me to just ignore it. So I ignored it. Then they stole my clothes during gym class and stuffed them in a urinal. And again, when I told the teacher who saw it all play out, do you want to know what she told me? Just ignore it. So, I'm sorry. But I'm not sorry to inform you all, ignoring bullies doesn't work. Ignoring stuff like this means ignoring who is starting the fire, and ignoring the people who are getting burned. And when a teacher says to a child, just ignore it, it teaches the kid that no one cares. Because at this point, everyone knows exactly what's happening. Everyone's witnessed it on multiple occasions. And you know what they've decided to do? Ignore it. And ignore you too. So you stop asking for help. Bullying gets worse because it's clear no one cares. Do you have any idea what that does to a kid? So I'm here to say, you must ignore the advice to just ignore it. I don't care how much you hate yourself because of what others made you believe. You're not stupid, you're not ugly, you're not a loser. You are a person with so much inner power that your vibes intimidate people. At the very least, I'm starting to suspect that bullies may not be the best judge of character. I think those girls picked on me for being, quote, fat and ugly, not because they wanted to go on jogs together and then go to Sephora for a makeup montage. No, I'm pretty sure these 12-year-old girls, they felt fat and ugly, and then they saw me, someone who didn't feel bad about the way they looked and was simply vibing. Or maybe it was because I was confident in my hobbies and abilities. I enjoyed drawing, my stuff got into art shows, I got A's and B's and wrote really good papers. So again, no idea where the logic is in calling me stupid. They obviously took offense to my confidence because they were jealous or felt insecure. Or, if not any of that, maybe the reason they bullied me was because making others feel like garbage is the only way they know how to be happy. And frankly, those kinds of people are pathetic. And I'll tell you now, they grow up to be a nasty breed of Karen. So, to quote the playground parable, I'm rubber, you're glue. Whatever you say bounces off of me and sticks to you. Pew 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 pew. I'll save you, Kovu. So that's why I ignored my parents' and my teacher's advice. I refused to ignore how Minnie, Willow, and Frankie were treating me. So I went to my teachers about it again, and this time I insisted we got the office involved. Because I wasn't playing around. Not anymore. And I knew I'd be called a snitch for it, and I sure as heck was. But hey, I've been called the other itch word 1,000,000 times by now. Nothing I couldn't handle. So me, my 3 bullies, and my frenemy Crystal were all called to the guidance counselor's office. And I recall, for a brief moment, they were nervous. For once, they were quiet in the hallway. Here's the messed up part about life. It's not a Tumblr post where everyone claps at the end. Once all the cards were down, the guidance counselor, who was kind of weird and spoke to students in the third person and was totally not qualified for this job, but hey, that's public school, we're underfunded, so we take what we can get, looked at all of us. And she said, "Look, girls, Mrs. Last Name just wants everyone to be friends. Can't we all just be friends?" These girls are not my friends. You have to act like someone's friend in order to be someone's friend. That's why we're here, Mrs. Guidance Counselor, oh wise one. We can't just hold hands and sing a Barney song when 4 out of 5 of us have stinky hands. And yet, the guidance counselor insisted we all just be friends again, and everyone just say sorry. And that is when my 11-year-old brain realized a lot of things. I was dealing with people who couldn't care less about telling the truth, about being respectful, treating others the way you want to be treated, you know? Like all the posters in this office said, I had no one by my side for any of this. Crystal didn't have the courage to back me up. My teachers didn't care. Nobody did. So, what did I do?
This Illymation video is brought to you by the letter C for confrontation. Learn her, respect her, but do not fear her.
I relate again, very firmly, that these girls were not my friends. They were my bullies, and peace was not an option. The counselor didn't listen. She insisted I, and I quote, stop bullying my friends and apologize. So, that's what I did. After that, I said nothing, I did nothing. Nothing changed until I was able to move classes 1 year later. I used to have this storybook belief that when people hurt you, they will eventually say sorry and mean it. But when I was a kid, I learned that no, that's not how the world works at all. There are people who will hurt you. There are people who don't even know you who will hurt you. There are people who will turn on you just for fun, just to see how much they can get away with. Because all of us have been hurt before, and all of us are still hurting. We're all outrunning something that we don't want to deal with. But you know what? I truly am sorry you're going through it. But so am I. So is everyone. So you don't get to toss your crap into someone else's yard just because you don't want to clean it up. Maybe quit pooping in your own yard so you don't have to deal with this, oh no, where do I throw my poop problem. This is a metaphor for self-sabotage. And I don't care who witnesses me throwing your own crap out of my yard and back in your face to deal with, because we both know which stinky hand it belongs to. The second you stand your ground and take no crap, you will have that power back. The power of pity. Looking back, I feel sorry for Minnie and Willow and Frankie and Crystal. They were probably going through something awful, and that's why they acted so horribly. Of course, that doesn't excuse it, and no amount of sorries can change the past, but the way I see it, you either run from it or learn from it. Oh, the only way they could fix a situation like this is to face whatever's making them so upset, so they can finally be happy, for their own sake and for others. And I won't lie, the things they said and did to me back then obviously still stick with me. But I do want to assure you, if you're watching this and you're in school right now and someone's making fun of you for being weird or walking weird or dressing weird or whatever crap they throw in your yard, just remember, that is just a baby Karen. And their karma will come. We've seen it. I know this video is a bit different from my usual content, but if you liked it, hit like. And if you want to see more, subscribe to my channel. And, as always, stay safe.
Paradox is a funny word. It's used for a lot of things that don't have that much to do with each other. Paradoxes are things that contradict themselves, or at least seem to contradict themselves in some way. That's about as specific as you can get while still fitting all the different things that people tend to call paradoxes. Now, I've come up with my own original system for classifying paradoxes, one which I think is more helpful than just having one single definition. I think the best way to talk about paradoxes is to divide them into 5 categories, and each of those can have an actual proper definition. This is pretty different from most of the ways you'll see paradoxes categorized, but I think this method makes at least a little bit of sense. So, I'm Young Measley, and let's go over each of these categories and have some fun with different examples in each type. That's it, that's the whole video, just listing paradoxes. Should be fun though. The first and most important type of a paradox is a logical contradiction. These are situations where every possible explanation can be shown to be incorrect. This is the primary definition of paradox, and the other 4 categories of paradox are called paradoxes due to their resemblance to these logical contradictions. I should note, in formal logic, the word contradiction doesn't actually mean this. It refers to just any time something cannot be true. true, whereas what I'm talking about are things that can't be true but also can't be false. So for those of you who actually study this stuff, keep in mind that when I say contradiction, that's what I'm generally referring to. One absolute classic paradox in this category is the liar paradox, which is as follows. This sentence is false. That's it. That's the whole paradox. Short and simple. If this sentence is false, then it's true, because I said it's false, and it is. But since it's true, that means it can't be false. So actually this sentence is false, which means it's true. No matter what, you cannot meaningfully give this statement a truth value, because any possible explanation is wrong. It's a logical contradiction. This basic paradox has been restated in countless ways under countless names, but they're all just different takes on this one concept. It's really the most straightforward logical paradox you can have. Okay, so here's a more advanced example. I happen to really enjoy when paradoxes start with a really weird hypothetical situation, and the crocodile paradox, or sometimes dilemma, is a classic example of that. Let's say a crocodile kidnaps a child. The crocodile then goes to the kid's parents and is like, "Hee hee hee, I'll give you your child back, if and only if you can correctly predict if I'm going to give you your child back or not." So assuming the parents do actually want their kid back, what should they predict? Now's your chance to figure it out yourself. Okay, time's up. If the parents say, "We think you will give us our kid back, crocodile," then the crocodile can do whatever it wants with the kid now, right? Like, it could say, "That's right, you have solved my crocodile's riddle fair and square, so here's your child, as promised." But it could just as easily say, "Tough luck, I have no intentions of returning your child to you, so now you will never see them again." And both answers would be following the rules the crocodile said at the start. But here's the tricky part. If the parents instead say, "We don't think you're giving our kid back at all," then it's the same self-contradiction thing as the liar paradox. Because if the crocodile gives them their kid back, then their prediction was wrong, so the crocodile wasn't supposed to give them their kid back. But if the crocodile doesn't give them their kid back, then their prediction was right, so the crocodile should give them their kid back, as promised. No matter what, the crocodile cannot do what it said it was going to do. A paradox. Here's another classic. The barber paradox. This one is pretty well known. Suppose there's a town where everyone is required by law to be shaved, and there's a barber who shaves everyone who doesn't shave themselves, and doesn't shave anyone else. But the barber lives in this town too, and therefore must be shaved. So then, who shaves the barber? You often see this one framed as a riddle, where you're expected to come up with some clever workaround. And there's a whole bunch of clever workarounds, because this problem is usually stated in natural language, like what I just did, leaving some things unstated that you can exploit. Depending on the phrasing, you could come up with various loopholes that make it so the barber doesn't need to be shaved at all. These self-referential paradoxes show up all over the place, and they all boil down to that same idea. You have some setup that leads to a statement that's dependent on its own truth value, so that if it's true, it's false, and if it's false, it's true. In general, whenever a logical contradiction shows up, it means that some assumption you made must be wrong. Sometimes, though, that assumption turns out to be, "The system of logic I'm using to form this statement is internally consistent and doesn't have contradictions." If you have some sort of formal logical system, and it's possible at all to make a statement like, "This sentence is false," then that proves that not all statements in that system can be shown to be either true or false. Does that make sense? Like, if you're hypothetically inventing the rules for an early version of set theory, and it turns out that it's possible to ask the question, does the set of all sets that do not contain themselves contain itself within the bounds of that system, that on its own shows that your system is inconsistent and has contradictions. Another common type of logical contradiction is when instead of having one thing contradict itself, two things contradict each other. There is a really unfun variant of the liar paradox that fits this description, but the most well-known example of this subtype is the irresistible force paradox. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? These two terms are kind of poorly defined, but I think most people intuitively get what this is supposed to mean. If the unstoppable force is capable of moving the object, then the object isn't immovable. But if the immovable object isn't moved by the force, then the force isn't unstoppable. So then, at least one of these two things can't exist, because if they both exist, it's a contradiction. A more concrete version of this idea is like, say there's a sword sharp enough to cut through any shield, and a shield strong enough to block any blade. But of course, those two things can't simultaneously exist, because their definitions contradict each other. So at least one of those descriptions must be incorrect. An even more fun example of two contradictory definitions is the buttered cat paradox. As we all know, cats always land on their feet, and buttered bread always lands butter side down. So if you attach a piece of bread, butter side up, to the back of a cat, then drop the cat, what would happen? Since this one is describing real phenomena, there actually is a non-paradoxical answer here. The reason buttered bread usually lands butter side down is that the side with butter on it is heavier, but if the side that doesn't have butter has a cat attached to it, then clearly the side with the cat is heavier now. So you'd expect the bread to land cat side down. And unless the cat's reflexes are thrown off by having a piece of bread taped to its back, you would also expect the cat to land on its feet. Unless, of course, the adhesive used to attach the bread to the cat is relatively weak, in which case the bread and cat could become detached in midair, allowing the cat to land on its feet and the buttered bread to land butter side down. Okay, you definitely get the point by now, right? Cool, let's do a couple more subtle logical contradictions before moving on to the next category. There are infinitely many natural numbers. Some of them are interesting and others aren't. What exactly it means for a number to be interesting is subjective and will vary from person to person, but we can generally state that a number is interesting if it has some unique property that sets it apart from other numbers. If we assume then that only some natural numbers are interesting, then clearly there is an infinite set of natural numbers that aren't interesting, and in this set, one number must be the smallest uninteresting number, which is a pretty interesting property, which makes it an interesting number. This paradox is normally presented as a joke, the punchline being that this contradiction implies that all numbers must be interesting. Of course, there are several other assumptions that were made which led to that conclusion. It would make just as much sense to conclude that no numbers are interesting, or more boringly, that this notion of an interesting number just doesn't make sense to begin with, and cannot be precisely defined. One more contradiction before moving on to the next type, and this is one of my favorites in this category. It's another one with a weird setup, so you know it's gonna be a good one. So, a prisoner is told that they're going to be executed at noon on a day at some point in the next work week. They're not told what day next week it'll be, because the judge wants to make sure that it happens when the prisoner isn't expecting it, for some unknowable reason. The prisoner thinks about this. The hanging will happen at noon on some day from Monday to Friday, and it'll be unexpected when it happens. They quickly realize that they won't be hanged on Friday, because if they make it past noon on Thursday without being hanged, then they'll know exactly when they're being hanged, so it wouldn't be unexpected. But since that means it must happen on some day from Monday to Thursday, then they can rule out Thursday too, for the same reason. And following that exact same reasoning, they can one by one rule out all 5 possible dates, concluding that the only way for their hanging to be unexpected is if it doesn't happen next week at all. So when they're hanged on Wednesday, it's completely unexpected. This paradox is great. Like all of these story-based ones, there's a lot of ways you could try to resolve the contradiction here, but in its purest mathematical form, it's a real pickle. There are a lot of angles people have taken to try to explain this one, and I'll be exploring none of those because I'd rather just move on. The second type of paradox is what I'm going to call a normal impossible question. This is a pretty weird thing to call these, so allow me to explain. An impossible question is exactly what it sounds like. It's a question that's impossible to answer. However, not all impossible questions are paradoxes. Bilbo's riddle, "What have I got in my pocket?" is an impossible question, but it does have a correct answer, and the person who asked it knows what the correct answer is. It's just impossible for anyone else to know the answer. This isn't a paradox, and it's also not a riddle. The other type of question I'm excluding from this category is impossible questions that are impossible because they're logical contradictions, since those were already included in the first group. So what I mean by a normal impossible question is a question that's impossible to answer, but not because there is a correct answer that's just secret, and also not because all possible answers lead to contradictions. This will be easier to understand with examples, and I have a decent amount of them. I'm pretty sure this is the third time I've mentioned the ship of Theseus in a video. It's a very famous thought experiment, and it's a great example of what I mean by a normal impossible question. For those who are unfamiliar, imagine a ship. As the ship ages, its individual pieces break and are replaced with new parts. Likewise, members of the crew grow old and retire, and new crewmates are brought on to replace them. Eventually, the entire ship consists of replacement parts, and none of the original ship remains. So then, is it the same ship, or at some point in that process did it turn into a new ship? There's clearly something paradoxical about this question, but it's definitely not the same kind of paradox as a standard logical contradiction. After all, both basic answers to the question are logically consistent. There's just no real way to prove which one is definitively correct. There's also a bonus harder version of this paradox, where instead of the individual parts being discarded when they stop functioning, they're put aside, and then later all of those pieces are reassembled into the exact form of the original ship. So then you can ask, which of these two ships is the original? The ship of Theseus is very similar to another, much less interesting paradox, the paradox of the heap. Imagine a heap of sand. If you were to very carefully remove one grain of sand from the heap, it would still be a heap, but if you keep doing that for long enough, you'd have just one grain of sand, which isn't a heap. And 2 grains of sand are also clearly not a heap, so at what point in that process does the heap stop being a heap? This one is less interesting than the ship of Theseus because, to me at least, it's way more obvious what's going on. The word heap doesn't have a very specific definition, so there's no way to unambiguously say exactly how many grains of sand there are in a heap. This is true for most words, and people sometimes get really angry about this, but it's fine. There are, of course, some normal impossible questions that aren't just language tricks. The Boltzmann brain is a pretty freaky one. It's commonly accepted that simple explanations for things are generally more likely to be true than more complicated explanations. You know, Occam's razor. However, if this idea is taken to its extreme, you could ask about what the simplest possible explanation is for the nature of reality itself. After all, what's simpler? That the universe exists and is full of complex dynamic systems and sentient beings who can observe it, or that the universe is mostly empty, except for one disconnected brain that's hallucinating that it exists in a more complex universe. Thinking about this one too hard is, a bad idea. So let's not. Aside from logical contradictions, the second most common thing people mean when they say paradox is a time paradox. A paradox caused by traveling back in time. These count as normal unanswerable questions, because in real life, time travel is probably impossible. The most well-known time paradox is the grandfather paradox. Suppose you went back in time and killed a much younger version of your grandfather. This would mean that one of your parents would never be born, and so you would never be born either. So you wouldn't be able to go back in time to kill your grandfather. That's a logical contradiction. But time travel is only a theoretical thing, and that's only one way we could imagine it working. There are other popular models of time travel where this isn't a contradiction at all. Like, say, going back in time creates an alternate timeline. So killing your grandfather would alter the course of that future, but not the future you came from. Or maybe weird predestination stuff happens that prevents you from killing your grandfather in the first place. A version of time travel very popular in science fiction. There are many different explanations we could come up with to explain what would happen to resolve the grandfather paradox, but there's no practical way to figure out which one is quote-unquote correct here, thus making this a normal impossible question. Subatomic particles have this annoying tendency to behave differently depending on if they're being observed or not. There's this concept of a superposition, where a particle can be in multiple states simultaneously, but once the particle is observed, the superposition collapses, and the particle randomly picks exactly one state to be in according to some probabilistic function. A lot of people, including a few famous scientists you've definitely heard of, have pointed out that this doesn't sound right. Like, there's no way that can be literally how it works, but it certainly appears to be the case from various experiments that I won't get into because I wouldn't do a good job explaining them. One huge problem with this particular model is that it's unclear exactly what counts as an observation, and that's where Schrödinger's cat comes in. So, completely hypothetically, let's say an evil scientist sets up a contraption where it makes some quantum measurement, like, say, detecting when a radioactive substance decays, and then, depending on its reading, will either do nothing or release some poison, and it has a 50% chance of doing each one. Then, this device is locked in a box with a cat. What happens? At a quantum level, a particle either decays or it doesn't, but nobody's observed it, so it's in a superposition of both states at the same time. Then, when the machine measures it, it either detects that the particle decayed or it doesn't. But nobody observes this either, so the machine is also in a quantum superposition. So the machine simultaneously releases the poison and doesn't release the poison. This would mean that until someone opens the box to see what happened, the cat is in a quantum superposition of being both alive and dead at the same time. Unless the cat counts as an observer, then the superposition collapsed when the cat either got poisoned or didn't, or maybe the machine itself is an observer, so it collapsed as soon as the measurement was made. Or maybe this model of quantum mechanics is fundamentally flawed, and this notion of a superposition collapsing when observed isn't actually true, and there's some other way to explain the annoying behavior of subatomic particles that hasn't been worked out yet. Like other normal impossible questions, this isn't a logical contradiction, because there are plenty of ways you could explain this. It's just that nobody's come up with a way you'd ever be able to determine which answer is actually right. Okay, last one for this category. Assuming it exists, the universe is very big, and people have been trying very hard for a very long time to find signs that there is any intelligent life beyond this one planet, and yet nobody's found anything. So where is everybody? There are tons of possible explanations for the Fermi paradox, thus making it not a logical contradiction, but unless someone does eventually find proof that there is life on other worlds, this question is impossible to answer. Maybe we just haven't been looking hard enough, or maybe we've already seen signs of alien life, but it's just so different from what we expect that nobody knew what it was. Or maybe there's alien civilizations all over the place, but they're just hiding for some reason. Or maybe life is rare and special, and Earth is just too far away from our nearest neighbors to ever be able to know they're there. So definitely not a logical contradiction, but it is still paradoxical, in a sense, making it a normal, impossible question. The third type of paradox is what I'm going to call a counterintuitive fact, or what you might see referred to as a veridical paradox. These are things that look like they're logical contradictions, but really are just provably true facts. From what I can tell just from talking to people about paradoxes sometimes, a lot of people don't think things that can be definitively resolved should count as paradoxes. A paradox shouldn't have an answer, you know? But that's the benefit of dividing paradoxes into these distinct groups, right? That way we can acknowledge that this is a different kind of thing from logical contradictions and normal impossible questions, but at the same time acknowledge that it is something that is often called a paradox. Anyway, time for some examples. An archer fires an arrow at a target, but if you think about it, how exactly is the arrow able to reach the target? After all, to get to the target, it must first make it halfway there, but before that, it must make it 1/4 of the way there, and 1/8 before that. You can keep dividing like this forever, and see that there are an infinite number of these points that the arrow must pass before reaching its destination. How is motion possible at all? This is one of Zeno's paradoxes, and it's not a contradiction, and it's also not an impossible question. This is simply a counterintuitive fact. Yes, you can divide any finite distance into infinitely many segments, and it remains finite. In the real world, there is a theoretical limit to how short of a distance you can have before it stops being measurable, but this is abstract math stuff, so we don't have to worry about that. Abstract